Hey everyone, welcome to the A to Z Movie Show. I'm Charlie Aziza, your average moviegoer.
Okay, I'll be quiet. You can go. No, just do it again.
I'm AJ Beltis. I watch a lot more movies than Charlie does.
He's the resident moviegoer.
Yes, I'm the resident movie goer.
Guru, that's what I meant, guru.
What are you drinking tonight, Charlie?
So I already drank my first beer, which was a Bright from Treehouse. But I am right now drinking a ice cold Bud Light.
True American hero over here. I've been holding on to this since I forced our other roommate David, who made those quacking noises, to go with me on Black Friday for a 3-hour round trip and stand in line for an hour. But I just cracked open a Somewhere Something Incredible is Waiting to Be Known from Treehouse Brewing Company in Charlton, Massachusetts.
This Bud Light tastes a lot different than I remember. It's been a minute since I've had a Bud Light.
Oh, I hope it's been more than a minute.
No, it's been a few minutes, but anyway.
It's also been in the fridge for probably 6 months.
No, it's actually good. I like it better than I thought. Anyway, we shouldn't talk too much about beer. This is a movie podcast.
We're talking about The Disaster Artist.
Yes.
The Disaster Artist.
This movie was something else, let me tell you.
All right. Well, let's tell them what it's about first, in case the 2% of people who are listening don't know what it's about. The Disaster Artist is a, per Wikipedia, 2017 American biographical comedy drama film. Boy, that's a lot of qualifiers. Produced, directed, and starring James Franco. Everyone knows James Franco. He got his arm caught in Iraq, but he cut it off, and he grew it back. We also got Seth Rogen, Dave Franco, Alison Brie, Josh Hutcherson, surprisingly, was in there. I forgot that he was in this movie until I watched him.
I forgot how much I hate him.
Katniss, what are you doing? You gotta get out of here. Go!
So bad. And
this movie is about the making of the 2003 cult film The Room, written, directed, and produced by Tommy Wiseau. This movie is kind of the retelling of how this movie was made, but also the establishment of the relationship between Tommy Wiseau and co-star Greg Sestero, who went on to write the book The Disaster Artist, which inspired this movie.
Don't feel bad if you guys don't know what he's talking about. I had no idea that this movie was a thing until last week when we discussed watching this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to clarify, Charlie has never seen or heard of The Room.
I have heard of it, yeah. But I never paid any attention.
So if I were 2 weeks ago just to come up to you and say, "Oh, hi, Mark," you wouldn't know what I'm talking about?
Correct, I would not know.
If I said, "Hi, doggy," you wouldn't?
No.
You are tearing me apart, Charlie.
Okay.
None of that?
Nope.
Okay, just making sure. Just qualifying and clarifying the discussion. So I've never been one of those midnight screeners. I didn't do anything crazy. The first time I saw this movie was in 2000, so 3 years ago.
You mean you've never been a midnight screener of this movie?
Yes, of this one.
Okay.
So the first time I saw this was 3 years ago. I watched it, and it was a good experience to watch it. And then I watched it a couple days ago to prep for this.
Okay.
This
How
event.
long is this movie, by the way?
An hour. The Disaster Artist or The Room? They're actually
The Room.
They're both an hour and 40
minutes.
minutes.
Oh, that's painful.
Yeah.
That is awful. Okay.
Well, no, because it's quite an entertaining experience.
Yeah, well, as we saw at the end of The Disaster Artist, the original movie, or not the original, but the movie on which this movie is based, was very entertaining.
Quick aside, David, this stout has so many different flavors. I don't know what to make of it, so I'm curious what you think.
All right, that's enough about beer.
Is there ever enough to be said about beer?
We might have under 21 audience members listening to this, so yes, that's enough about beer.
So, The Disaster Artist. All right, let's talk about what we liked about this movie. First off, and I'm going to be totally broad here, I liked the idea behind it. I loved this idea of showing what it was like and how a movie like this came to be made. For those of you who really aren't familiar with The Room, it has cemented itself as the worst, the best, worst movie ever made. It just absolute obscenities. The storyline makes zero sense. The characters make zero sense. One character, who is Johnny, he ends up having his whole life torn apart, and the way that it is deconstructed on screen in The Room just makes no sense whatsoever.
Which one's Johnny?
Johnny is
the main character?
Tommy Wiseau, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Long hair. This guy who plays him, no one knows anything about him. No one knows how he got the money to finance the $6 million movie.
Well, it's more than the guy who just plays him. It's the guy who wrote the entire screenplay.
He did everything.
Right. This is his story.
No one knows, again, where he got his money. No one knows how old he is. Nobody knows where he's from. This guy's life is an enigma. And his story is just as fascinating as the story of The Room.
More. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, do you have more to add to that?
No, I just liked the idea behind this movie. I was talking to a coworker. I guess I do have more to add to it. I was talking to a coworker who she's gone and seen The Room with Tommy, The Room with Greg Sestero, and seen them do Q&As at the movie.
You mean the actual actors?
Yes, the actual actors and people behind this movie. And she has said that she does not want this movie to exist. She wants the people who are aware of The Room to kind of keep it in their own cults and not really open it up to anyone. She wants people to kind of find it when they hear about it through somebody or go to an event or have somebody show it to them. Okay. And so to have it be brought to national storytelling just kind of disrupts what all these fans of The Room were used to.
I mean, I guess, but how many people roughly... I mean, that's not really a good question. Roughly, like, what percentage of people you know have seen this movie who aren't movie gurus as you are?
I mean, I think less than half.
Okay. So, I mean, it's not like it's a very, very niche movie. I mean, people have seen this.
People have seen it, but I think more people will have heard of it or known of it as opposed to having actually sat down and watched the whole thing. See, before I watched the movie in its entirety, I knew Oh Hi Mark. I knew kind of the scenes and the idea behind it, and that The Room was the worst movie ever made. I knew the facts about it in the story.
But also, you just are more in tune with the movie culture than other people are.
So anyways, that's enough about, I think, The Room. Let's talk about The Disaster Artist. And I gave kind of a thing about what I liked about it. What did you like about it or dislike about it? Tell me your thoughts, Charlie. What do you think?
So when I first started watching this movie, I mean, AJ had told me a little bit about what it was. I didn't fully understand, maybe because you weren't explaining well, maybe because you didn't want me to.
I explain with the best words. I have the best words.
Right. The tremendous words.
The best.
So I didn't fully understand what it was going to be. I didn't know if it was going to be a documentary of how this movie was made, like sort of actual shots of the movie being recorded, or if it was going to be the actual movie, except even worse than the original as like a spoof. And I don't know if it was going to end up being exactly what it was, which is sort of kind of a hybrid of both. And it took me probably about the first 20 minutes of the movie to actually figure out what was going on. I forget at what point I actually realized what was going on. But yeah, no, it's hard to actually wrap my head around this movie. I don't even know what to say. I did definitely like it a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll follow up with what you were saying, and I think I was feeling the pains like to kind of start with at the beginning. I think it was. I don't want to say it was having its trouble finding its footing at the beginning, but when people think of The Room and Tommy and Greg, they don't really think of San Francisco and early acting classes. They think of Greg Sestero having to live in the horror stories of him living with Tommy Wiseau. They think about the horror stories on set. They think about what it was like. What were the people thinking, the professionals, when they shot this movie? Why were they using both HD and 35 millimeter when it cost twice as much money, and you only use one print in the end?
To be clear, there was no reason.
There was no reason whatsoever. Tommy just, I do both. I do both.
He basically had no idea what he was doing.
Yeah, he had no idea what he was doing.
And for a lot of the movie, I was sitting there wondering, is this guy a secret genius, or does he genuinely have no clue what he's doing?
Genuinely no clue what he's doing.
And then eventually the audience is made aware of that, I say, about halfway through the movie. Mm-hmm. I don't know. But definitely there is this sort of limbo. You don't know what's going on with this guy. Mm. And actually, at first, when you can see at the beginning that he's not a good actor. Fine, whatever. He's not a good actor. But then when he writes the screenplay and he shows it to Greg, he kind of you hear little snippets of it, so you get the impression that it's not the best. But you wonder is this what he's good at? Is he good at writing screenplays and directing? And that's sort of why he becomes famous.
Okay, so sorry, put me in your position. You're saying that as you, Charlie, the viewer of The Disaster Artist, you're kind of thinking, wow, this movie, The Room, may end up being a good movie. Is that what you're thinking, or?
Kind of, yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, I know that you told me that it was bad to begin with, but I was kind of keeping that out of my mind as I was watching it. So somebody who's going into this movie not fully aware of the context around it, the culture and the history behind it, which I'm sure is a good number of people who just brought there by their friends, or maybe they just read a quick summary of it and they go see the movie, whatever. It can stand on its own as a good movie. You don't need to know about the history of it to enjoy it.
I think that's a really important note. That's kind of a conclusion point that we're jumping ahead to, but that's good to know that people who did not see The Room or really haven't heard of The Room can appreciate this movie. Yeah, because that was a point of view that I wasn't going to be able to offer coming into this.
Yeah.
But things that I liked about this movie. Let's jump right into James Franco, because at first I really was not sold on him. In the movie starts off with, back in '98, about 5 years before The Room comes out, him and Greg Sestero playing in a improv camp together, in an improv class, and they're both not good actors, but I looked at what James Franco was doing at the beginning there, and he seemed almost kind of timid as an actor. Maybe he was unsure about getting into Tommy Wiseau. I'm not really sure, but I wasn't really sold in his performance. But once they moved to LA, I loved every single second of James Franco's performance, and he's been creeping up there for awards and Oscar talk, and I can see him as legitimately being part of the conversation.
I can see that. I mean, he has a very distinct character, and I mean, going into this, like I said, I didn't know who this Tommy guy was. I didn't know anything about him, but at the end, it's not really a spoiler. At the end, they show comparisons between the movie that they make in The Disaster Artist and the original movie, and the guy is exactly the same.
Yeah.
The voice is the same. He looks almost exactly the same. Yep. Slight age difference, I guess, but almost. He's probably the most spot-on character. So the acting, I can definitely see that being an Academy Award nominee or winner even.
And while we're on the topic of Franco, let's talk about his directing. Because he had a pretty big ensemble. Granted, a lot of them...
He directed it?
He directed this movie.
Okay.
Now, granted, he's directing his brother. He's directing Seth Rogen, who he's been working with for over 20 years. Zac Efron, who he's been working with, so there's definitely some comfort in knowing who you work with, but I gotta hand it to him. He had a massive ensemble that he was working with. He had a really big weight and pressure on him from the film community that knows about this movie, who, like I said, my coworker, they don't want to see this movie messed up. They want to see something worthwhile out of The Disaster Artist.
This is such a weird
and not
concept.
just have it be a money grab. And I think there was a lot in there from a directorial standpoint that he was able to bring to the table in terms of lightness and managing the entire crew and giving a lot of trust to people like Seth Rogen, who needs to just kind of go off and have his Seth Rogenisms and not trying to control that. I got to hand it to him for letting the cast do what they do best, which is just be funny people.
Yeah.
So I think he managed his team extremely well.
And it must be weird directing a movie about directing a movie. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's that level of self-awareness that you have to have if you're doing that.
So I got to hand it there. I think, again, directing was great. I already talked about the story. I liked how they went about telling this story all-encompassing from beginning to end.
Can I stop you there?
Sure.
How accurate, I don't know if you know, how accurate is the storyline of this movie compared to how The Room came about? Did all the early stages of the movie actually happen the way that they described in The Disaster Artist, or was it sort of elaborated on?
So there's no better person to speak to that than Tommy Wiseau, and I watched an interview with, he was on, I want to say either Kimmel or Fallon. I think it was Kimmel, and it was him, James Franco, and the host. And the host asked Tommy how accurate was this storytelling, and Tommy said, it's 99.99 there. And the host asked him, what's the 0.01%? And he said, the lighting was off a bit.
All right.
That was his response.
Fine. So how there is this guy in real life? Because if you watch The Disaster Artist, you'll look at this guy and think that, maybe at the beginning you think that he's just a secret genius or whatever, but toward the end of the movie, he's completely, he's not even sane. He borderline doesn't even know reality.
No, he. If you go and see one of these screenings where him and Greg will travel the country and go and they will play The Room at midnight showings, and then they will sit down for an hour and take questions from the audience.
Okay.
He is there firmly believing, and anyone who goes to the theater will say this, that you are all fans of my movie The Room. And you all love my movie The Room.
Okay.
He has also come out and said that after the movie came out and was received the way that it was intended to be a comedy. Kind of, remember at the end, he kind of saved his face and said, "Thank you for all enjoying my comedic movie the way that I intended it to be. It was always envisioned that way."
And he actually believes that?
That's what he's saying.
Okay.
When people ask him, why is there football so much in your movie? He said, well, football is a fun sport to play and you should be careful playing it. And say, why did you name your movie The Room? It's the Room is a fun and safe place to be. He gives these obscure New Orleans answers, I guess.
Okay.
We'll never know. That's some of the fun about Tommy Wiseau, is that you'll never really know the full answers.
Yeah, and they go into this a little bit at the beginning of the movie, and they keep harping on it a little bit throughout the movie. This guy is very secretive. He doesn't like to talk about his past, who he is, where he's from, anything like that. And I found myself, even now, wondering a little bit about him in real life, and David, you're distracting. You're distracting, okay?
He's trying to steal my beer.
Give him the beer.
No.
Okay. This guy is very fascinating, and that makes the movie just that much better.
Now, let's take a total step back and say that, again, for people who have never seen or heard of The Room whatsoever, and maybe they think this is a totally fictional movie, I still think there's a lot to be kind of appreciated in here. I love the journey that Tommy and Greg go on together. I think it's...
Oh, at the beginning, you mean?
Just all throughout. I think it's, through thick and thin, they made a pact at the beginning and said, we're gonna be famous, we're gonna make it one day. And they keep returning to that kind of pinky swear, which is a little juvenile, but
but I mean...
I appreciated that part of it.
No, I definitely like the beginning of the movie was very inspiring, but and without giving too many spoilers, that pact sort of goes away until the very end when it's convenient.
Maybe I'm speaking for the people who know The Room, but the dissolution, the ups and downs, and the Greg Sestero Tommy Wiseau relationship are pretty well known.
No, I know, but I mean, they implied in the last 20 or so minutes of the movie that Greg and Tommy had not spoken for a while between when they finished filming the movie and when the premiere was. Mm-hmm. And then Greg only came back to, sort of that we made this movie together thing when he realized that it could be a success / he felt really badly for Tommy, mm-hmm. and he wanted to comfort him and make him feel better because the guy's a lunatic.
But then it came back together in the end when
but only at the last minute.
No, not even after the credits rolled, but when everyone was laughing and Greg went out and said, "Look at what you did."
I know.
Yeah, I liked that.
Yeah,
that was him making good on his promise.
Oh, definitely. But Greg wasn't supporting Tommy after the movie was made, and he wasn't even going to go to the premiere originally.
It's true.
Without giving too many spoilers.
We basically just spoiled the whole thing.
Yeah. Anyway.
It's still worth seeing because this movie, in its essence, I would say, despite having a really good story of friendship and putting your mind to accomplishing your dream, and granted that's a lot easier when you have a bottomless pit of a bank account and you can just keep digging into it, but in essence this film is a comedy, and I think it succeeds in doing what it's intended to do. The Disaster Artist. It succeeds in getting you to laugh.
Yeah, but I also see elements of drama. I mean, I am genuinely interested in how these characters develop, both Greg and Tommy. Mm-hmm.
I think
there's definitely a lot of comedy in it too. Yeah, I don't know how to classify it.
I would say, a real movie. Like, it is, again, Wikipedia, all those qualifiers, it's a biographical comedy drama.
Yes.
So it is a biography, and I think because it is a biography and they didn't fabricate really that much, I'm sure maybe some lines and stuff, they didn't fabricate any really major story points. So everything you see in there is real life, and real life can be dramatic.
Yeah.
So it's easy for us to say because it's a biographical film, it's also very dramatic. But the situations, the way that they told the story was in a comedic fashion.
Yes.
And so
overall, yeah.
That's why I think when this movie is trying to be a comedy, I think, again, The Disaster Artist, not necessarily The Room, which did try to be a drama. I think it succeeds.
Did try to be a drama.
It did, sadly.
So, what else do we need to talk about for The Disaster Artist?
I think we're grasping at straws as it is. This was not a very technically driven film, so we don't need to really talk about cinematography or editing. I think everything, it was successful in being quick cut and fast paced and paced well enough that you could kind of have those really funny moments where they're doing the same scene 70 times, but also having that dramatic pause when Greg and Johnny are fighting. So I think editing wise, it was great. Yeah, I got really nothing much to knock against this movie.
So, AJ, do you think that somebody like myself, who hasn't seen The Room, doesn't necessarily, maybe has heard of it, but doesn't really know what it's about, what the deal with it is, should go see this movie?
I was literally going to say that.
What were you going to say? Go ahead.
Why would someone want to see this movie if they don't know anything about The Room?
Well, were you listening to exactly? Were you listening to what Charlie was saying for the past 20 minutes? He was just saying, as someone who has never seen this movie, I still liked it.
Yeah, but he went to see it because he wouldn't have seen it unless you brought him.
I wouldn't have seen it, but had I seen it, I still would have enjoyed it,
yeah.
Even if I didn't know what The Room was.
But why would people want to go see it without knowing anything about it and not being forced to go watch it?
Tell him, Charlie.
They might not. They might not go see this movie if somebody doesn't tell them or if they don't see an advertisement for it. But if they do see it, I think they would enjoy it because it is a standalone movie that's enjoyable on its own.
So in short, you do not need to have seen The Room to know much about The Room to enjoy this film.
No, but that said, I think that if you at least know what the deal with it is, you'll probably enjoy it a little bit more. As you probably enjoyed it a little bit more than I did.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling you about this when you were walking home, but there's a scene where Johnny and Greg first meet and hang out for the day, and Greg is out on his block playing football with his friends. And exactly, and so Johnny picks him up, and before Greg gets in the car, Johnny says, "Take football." And so half the theater laughs, and then the other half of the people are looking at the people saying, why are they laughing at this scene? It's because they just randomly play football in The Room. So there are definitely ample nods to people who have gone to see The Room again and again and again, or have seen it and know the famous scenes, but they don't really ram them down your throat. So
oh, that's good. We'll edit that one out. Okay, so
Charlie, give me your score. As someone who has never seen The Room, what do you give The Disaster Artist on a scale of 1 to 10?
1 to 10.
I'm sorry, 1 to 5.
1 to 5, yeah.
Pardon me.
I'm going to give this movie a 4 out of 5 stars. I think it was very enjoyable for a general audience for a variety of reasons. I think it holds your attention throughout. It's very interesting. The pacing is good, and the conclusion is satisfying, although it is historical/biographical, as we were saying, so that's a little bit out of their control anyway. But it's very entertaining throughout, and after you watch this movie as somebody who hasn't seen The Room, if you go back and look this stuff up on Wikipedia or Google or whatever, I think you will have an even greater appreciation for the movie, and it's just a very satisfying movie and experience overall. So I give it 4 out of 5.
So I know one of the things that we were trying to avoid in kind of doing the reboot of this show was having Charlie and I be on the same page, but unfortunately I think we're going to slip right back into that because I'm also going to give The Disaster Artist a 4 out of 5. Pacing was a little slow to begin with. I think the movie took 10-20 minutes to kind of find itself in all aspects, in pacing, in acting, in storytelling, but once it gets going, you're in for quite an enjoyable ride. I thought all the acting was totally on point. I thought James Franco did a great job in front of and behind the camera. I thought this movie went there with a lot of scenes, so filming the sex scene was hysterical to watch.
Was funny, yeah.
And you can only imagine how funny it was for that team to make. So the way that they were able to be so professional and also enjoy it. Dave Franco, who played Greg, is actually James Franco's younger brother, and he said the craziest thing about The Disaster Artist was being directed in a movie by my brother while he was naked. So just that mentality going into it just, I think, adds a whole nother layer of enjoyment to this film. I loved the references. I loved the comedy. I loved the storyline. I loved the way it all paid off in the end. Slow start, but overall, I give it high marks. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5.
Nice. Did they show the original sex scene in the final comparison between the Disaster Artist film, the quote film, and the original Room film?
I don't think so. Yeah, kind of before they show the credits, like Charlie was saying, they do side by side, shot for shot remakes of the Disaster Artist cast and the Room cast, and about, I don't know, half a dozen of their most notorious scenes. I don't think that made the cut, but
what? Okay, so as somebody who's seen both, was that accurate in the?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. They even had, so there was that scene where, I don't know if you caught that, but there was one window or glass panel that had water running down, and he's
yes,
like, it's
so
like, was it like sexy rainfall or something? That point of view shot was in the room, and they just had a camera panning around it and then not behind the window. All right, so that was The Disaster Artist. We both liked it a lot.
Yeah, interesting choice of movie for our second episode of this podcast. Not a traditional movie, but
we gotta talk to A24 and the distribution companies and say, hey, pick better movies for our early episodes of the podcast. You guys got to think of that stuff when you're planning for award season.
What do we have? What do we have for next week? Do you think?
I don't know.
Okay, well I know Star Wars is coming
Shape of
up,
Water.
right?
I think is coming out soon. Star Wars is coming up.
That won't be next week. That might be the week after.
Yeah. We can watch Mudbound. That's on Netflix. That's an awards contention. That's it's kind of like Beast of the Southern Wilds. Or, I'm sorry, Beasts of No Nation, how that got released on Netflix, but it's allowed for awards consideration, so that's on Netflix. You should go see Lady Bird.
Okay. Well, we'll discuss this.
We can talk about Get Out. Get Out is going to be an awards contention.
Well, the awards are on for a while.
Golden Globe nominations are in 6 days, my good man.
I don't care about Golden Globes.
Golden Globes are Hollywood's biggest night of the year, according to the Hollywood Foreign Press.
We'll discuss this on our own. You guys just tune in next week for... You guys just tune in for the next episode, and we'll have that movie picked out for you.
Okay. Alrighty.
Great. Thanks for listening, guys, and hope to see you next week.
This has been the A to Z Movie Show.